The stars had never looked so close. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Aurora, watching the readings on his screens change with every passing second. 5 years ago, humanity had discovered how to travel faster than light. 5 years. And now they were exploring systems that no human had ever seen before. Jake felt proud. His crew of 50 people were the best Earth had to offer. Scientists, engineers, soldiers, all working together to push humanity forward into the galaxy. The Kepler 442 system was supposed to be empty. The scans from Earth showed nothing unusual. Just another star with a few planets, none of them special. But as the Aurora moved deeper into the system, the sensors started picking up something strange, something big, something that should not be there. It was Dr. Kate Sullivan who saw it first. She was the chief science officer, a woman who had spent her whole life studying the stars. Her hands moved quickly over her console, her eyes growing wider with each new piece of data. She called out to Jake, her voice tight with excitement and fear. There was a structure ahead, massive, artificial, alien. Jake ordered the ship to slow down. The Aurora crept forward, and soon everyone on the bridge could see it. The alien station hung in space like a dark metal moon. It was covered in lights and symbols that hurt to look at. Ships moved around it, ships that were larger than anything humanity had ever built. Jake felt his heart beating faster. This was it, first contact. The moment that would change everything. The communication systems came alive. A voice spoke in perfect English, cold and sharp. It introduced itself as Commander Vexthor of the Xinthian species. The voice belonged to the Galactic Council, an alliance of 12 advanced alien races that ruled the galaxy. They had been watching. They had been waiting. And now they wanted to talk. Jake tried to keep his voice steady as he responded. He spoke about peace, about friendship, about the hope that humanity could learn from these older, wiser species. He offered everything he could think of: knowledge, trade, partnership. Dr. Kate Sullivan stood beside him, ready to share humanity's discoveries in science and math. They wanted to show that humans were worth knowing. The response was not what they expected. Commander Vexthor laughed. It was not a warm laugh. It was the sound of someone looking at a child who had said something foolish. The alien commander explained that the Council had been watching Earth for hundreds of years. They knew everything about humanity. They had seen the wars, the violence, the conflicts that never seemed to end. They had watched humans fight and kill each other over and over again. Humans were classified as a Level 2 civilization, Vexthor said. That meant they were primitive, dangerous, not ready to join the galaxy. There were rules in space, ancient rules that kept order. Humanity was too young, too violent, too emotional. The Council had seen thousands of species like humanity. Most of them destroyed themselves before they could spread to the stars. The ones that survived learned to accept their place. Jake felt anger rising in his chest. Lieutenant Ryan Carter, the tactical officer, moved closer to the weapons console. His jaw was tight, his hands ready. But Jake raised one hand, telling him to wait. They could not fight here, not now. Not against something they did not understand. Then Vexthor delivered the final blow. The Galactic Council had made a decision about humanity. Earth would be quarantined. No human ship was allowed to leave the solar system. If any human vessel was found beyond that boundary, it would be destroyed immediately. No warnings, no second chances. The Council was placing a massive automated defense system around Earth's sun. A cage made of metal and energy that would trap humanity in its own backyard forever. The words hit Jake like physical blows. He looked around the bridge at his crew. They all wore the same expression: shock, disbelief, rage. Dr. Kate Sullivan's face had gone pale. Lieutenant Ryan Carter looked like he wanted to start shooting right then and there. But what could they do? The Council had hundreds of ships, thousands maybe, technology that was thousands of years more advanced than anything Earth had. Jake tried one more time. He spoke about human history, about how humanity had always found ways to overcome impossible challenges. He talked about courage and determination. He pleaded for the Council to give humanity a chance to prove itself. Just one chance. Vexthor's response was simple. The decision was final. The quarantine would be active within 1 Earth week. If the Aurora wanted to return home, it should leave now. Otherwise, it would be trapped out here, cut off from Earth forever. The communication ended. The alien voice disappeared. The Council ships moved into position around the massive station, making it clear that the conversation was over. Jake stood silent for a long moment. His crew waited, watching him, trusting him to make the right choice. Finally, he spoke. His voice was quiet but firm. They would return to Earth, but this was not over. Not by a long way. Humanity did not accept cages. Humanity did not bow to threats. If the Council thought they could imprison Earth, they were about to learn something important about human nature. The Aurora turned away from the alien station. As they prepared to jump back to Earth, Jake made a promise to himself and his crew. The Council believed humanity was weak, divided, and easy to control. They thought fear would be enough to keep humans in line. They were wrong. What the Council did not understand was that humanity's greatest strength came out when they faced impossible odds. When someone tried to cage them, humans became dangerous. Lieutenant Ryan Carter stood at his station, his hands still near the weapons controls. He looked at Jake and spoke quietly. The tactical officer said what everyone was thinking. If the Council wanted a fight, humanity would give them one they would never forget. Dr. Kate Sullivan nodded in agreement. Her scientific mind was already working, thinking about ways to break the quarantine, planning, calculating, refusing to accept defeat. The journey back to Earth took 3 days. 3 days for the news to spread through the ship, 3 days for anger to replace shock. By the time they reached home, every member of the crew had made the same decision. They would not let Earth be imprisoned. They would find a way to break free no matter what it cost. As Earth came into view, beautiful and blue against the darkness of space, Jake thought about what was coming. The Council had made a mistake. They saw human violence and called it weakness. They saw human emotion and called it primitive. They never asked why humanity fought so hard. They never wondered what made humans so difficult to defeat throughout their own history. The answer was simple. Humans did not give up. When they were pushed, they pushed back harder. When they were threatened, they became more dangerous. When someone tried to take their freedom, they would burn down the galaxy before accepting chains. The Council thought they were dealing with just another primitive species. They had no idea what they had just started. The Aurora docked at the orbital station above Earth. Jake prepared to deliver his report to the government. He would tell them everything. About the Council, about the quarantine, about the cage that would soon surround their world. And then he would tell them something else, something that would change humanity forever. They were not alone in the universe anymore. But the universe was not what they had hoped. It was ruled by arrogance and fear. The time for exploration was over. The time for fighting had begun, and if the Galactic Council thought they had seen human violence before, they were about to learn what humanity looked like when it was truly afraid, when it was truly angry, when it had everything to lose and nothing left to fear. The stars had never looked so close, but now they looked different. Not like a promise of wonder, like a battlefield waiting to be claimed. The Council members gathered in their grand chamber, millions of light years from Earth. They stood in a circle, each representing their ancient species. Commander Vexthor reported his encounter with the human ship. The other Council members listened and nodded. Another primitive species had been found. Another quarantine had been placed. Everything had gone exactly as it always did. The Council had done this hundreds of times before. Whenever they found a violent young species, they locked them away. It was for the good of the galaxy, they said. It maintained peace. It protected everyone. The quarantined species always accepted their fate eventually. Some took decades, some took centuries, but they all gave up in the end. Humanity would be no different. What the Council did not understand was that they had studied humanity all wrong. They watched human wars and saw chaos. They looked at human history and saw endless conflict. They counted the dead from human battles and called it proof of a failed species. But they never asked the right questions. They never wondered why humans kept fighting, why humans never accepted defeat, why every attempt to conquer humanity throughout its own history had failed. The Council believed the quarantine beacon would hold. It was their best technology, automated defense platforms with enough firepower to destroy a planet, energy shields that could not be broken, weapons that tracked anything moving faster than light. Nothing had ever escaped a Council quarantine. The system was perfect, or so they thought. On Earth, the response was different than anything the Council could have predicted. When Jake Morrison delivered his report, when the world leaders heard about the quarantine, something unexpected happened. The fighting stopped. The arguments ended. Every nation, every group, every human on Earth suddenly had the same enemy. For the first time in human history, the entire species was truly united. An emergency meeting was called. Leaders from every country gathered. There was no debate about what to do. No arguments about who was in charge. They all agreed instantly. Earth would not accept this cage. They formed the United Earth Defense Initiative and put Director Lisa Chen in command. She had led NASA's advanced research for 20 years. If anyone could find a way to break the quarantine, it was her. Lisa stood before the Council of World Leaders and spoke clearly. Breaking the quarantine would not be easy. The Council had technology that was thousands of years more advanced. But humanity had something the Council had forgotten. Humans thrived when they were desperate, when their backs were against the wall, when everything seemed impossible. That was when humans did their best work. History proved it over and over again. The project was named Operation Broken Chain. Every resource Earth had was poured into it. Money meant nothing anymore. Politics did not matter. The only thing that mattered was freedom. Dr. Kate Sullivan was given unlimited funding and access to the brightest minds on the planet. Engineers, physicists, mathematicians, all working toward one goal: find the weakness in the Council's cage, break it open, set humanity free. The work happened in secret. Deep underground facilities were built. Entire cities of scientists and engineers working around the clock. Dr. Kate Sullivan hardly slept. Her team studied the data they had collected from the Council station. They analyzed every piece of alien technology they could find. They ran millions of simulations. Failure after failure. But humans knew how to learn from failure. 2 engineers became key to the project. Ben Foster was young but brilliant, a specialist in quantum physics who saw patterns others missed. Maya Rodriguez was an expert in energy systems, someone who understood how power moved through complex networks. Together they made a breakthrough. The Council's shields were powerful, but they were old. Ancient technology that had not been updated in centuries. And old things always had flaws. Ben discovered that the quarantine beacon used quantum entanglement to coordinate its weapons. Every defense platform was connected to every other platform through a network that moved faster than light. It was brilliant design, but it had a weakness. If you could tap into that network, if you could understand its language, you could turn it against itself. You could make the beacon destroy itself from the inside. Maya found a way to make it happen. She designed a shield system that did not block energy. Instead, it redirected energy. It caught the beacon's plasma fire and sent it back along the quantum network. The beacon would essentially shoot itself. It was crazy. It was impossible. It was exactly the kind of thinking that made humans dangerous. While the scientists worked, Admiral Stephen Blake was building a fleet. Not exploration ships this time. Warships, vessels designed to fight and survive. Every shipyard on Earth was running at full capacity. New weapons were developed. New armor was tested. Humanity was preparing for war, something humans unfortunately knew very well how to do. Lieutenant Ryan Carter was promoted to commander and given a special assignment. He worked with military leaders from every nation, combining their knowledge of warfare into something new. The Council fought with discipline and coordination. They followed ancient battle strategies that had won them 1,000 victories. Ryan's job was to throw out every rule of warfare and create something the Council had never seen. Chaos with purpose, unpredictability as a weapon. Captain Jake Morrison watched as the new fleet took shape. 50 ships had become 100, then 200, then 300. Each one was filled with volunteers who knew they might die. But they also knew they were fighting for something bigger than themselves. They were fighting for Earth's future, for the right to exist as a free species, for the chance to show the galaxy that humanity would not be caged. 3 years passed. 3 years of constant work. 3 years of preparation. The Council watched Earth through their sensors and saw nothing that worried them. They saw ships being built, but that was expected. Caged species always tried to find ways to escape at first. They would try. They would fail. They would learn to accept their place.
It always happened that way. What the Council did not see was the change happening inside humanity.
The unity. The determination. The quiet rage that was building. Earth had become a single nation with a single purpose. Old enemies became allies. Resources were shared freely. Knowledge flowed without borders. Humanity had learned what it meant to be human. Not perfect, not peaceful, but unstoppable when they decided to fight for something that mattered. Dr. Kate Sullivan presented the final design to director Lisa Chen. It would work. The calculations were perfect. Ben Foster's quantum network tap would penetrate the beacon systems. Maya Rodriguez's shield design would reflect the plasma fire. The beacon would tear itself apart within 17 minutes of the attack beginning. Lisa looked at the numbers and smiled. It was time. Admiral Stephen Blake assembled the fleet commanders. He stood before them. Men and women from every nation, every culture, every background. He told them what was about to happen. In 3 days, they would launch the largest military operation in human history. They would attack the quarantine beacon. They would break free or die trying. No one hesitated. No one questioned. They all knew what had to be done. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his new ship, the Vanguard. It was 10 times larger than the Aurora, armed with weapons that could crack a moon in half. His crew had trained together for 3 years. They knew every system. They had practiced every maneuver. They were ready. Jake looked out at the stars and thought about Commander Vexthor. The alien had dismissed humanity as primitive. He had laughed at their offers of friendship. He had placed them in a cage and expected them to stay there. Commander Ryan Carter worked at the tactical station, making final adjustments to the attack plan. His strategies were unconventional, aggressive, built on the idea that humans did not fight fair when their survival was at stake. The Council expected order and discipline. Ryan was going to give them chaos and fury. He was going to show them what human warfare really looked like. The final night before the attack, Director Lisa Chen broadcast a message to Earth. She spoke to all of humanity. She told them about the sacrifice that was about to be made. She explained that many ships would not return. Many people would die, but their deaths would mean something. They would buy freedom for everyone who came after. They would prove that humanity could not be broken, could not be caged, could not be stopped. The message ended with a promise. Tomorrow the quarantine would fall. Tomorrow humanity would show the Galactic Council what they had awakened. Tomorrow the stars would learn that humans were not just another primitive species. They were something the galaxy had never seen before. Something dangerous, something unstoppable, something that would shake the very foundations of the Council's ancient power. The time for preparation was over. The time for action had arrived. The morning came cold and clear. 50 human warships rose from Earth orbit in perfect formation. The Vanguard led them with Captain Jake Morrison standing on the bridge, his hands steady even though his heart was racing. Behind them, 300 more ships waited in reserve. The largest fleet humanity had ever assembled. They moved toward the edge of the solar system where the quarantine beacon waited like a metal giant. The beacon detected them immediately. Its sensors had been watching for 3 years, waiting for exactly this moment. Automated systems came online. Thousands of plasma cannons rotated into position. Energy shields powered up. The beacon had destroyed hundreds of ships from other species who tried to escape. It had never failed. Its programming was simple. Destroy anything that tries to leave. No warnings, no mercy. The first wave of plasma fire lit up space like a second sun. Millions of energy bolts screamed toward the human fleet at the speed of light. Enough firepower to turn a planet into dust. The crew of the Vanguard held their breath. This was the moment that would decide everything. Either Dr. Kate Sullivan's shields would work, or they would all die in the next 3 seconds. The shields activated. But they did not block the plasma. Instead, they caught it, redirected it. The quantum entanglement network that Ben Foster had spent 3 years understanding suddenly had human code running through it. Maya Rodriguez's energy system grabbed every plasma bolt and sent it back through the network, back to where it came from, back to the beacon itself. The beacon's own weapons struck its own shields. The explosion was beautiful and terrible. One defense platform destroyed itself, then another. Then 10 more. The beacon tried to compensate. It tried to shut down the weapons, but the human code was too deep in its systems now. The feedback loop had started and nothing could stop it. 17 minutes. That was how long Dr. Kate Sullivan had calculated it would take. She was right down to the second. At minute 17, the quarantine beacon tore itself apart in the explosion that could be seen from Earth. Pieces of metal and energy scattered across space. The cage was broken. The impossible had happened. Humanity was free. On the Vanguard, the crew erupted in cheers. Commander Ryan Carter pumped his fist in the air. Jake Morrison allowed himself a small smile. They had done it. They had proven the council wrong, but Jake knew this was just the beginning. Breaking the cage was one thing. Keeping their freedom was going to be much harder. The news reached the Galactic Council within hours. In their grand chamber, the 12 species gathered in emergency session. The report seemed impossible. A level 2 species had destroyed a quarantine beacon. It had never happened before. Not in 10,000 years of council rule. Not once. Commander Vexthor stood before the council and demanded immediate action. This was not just a failure of technology. This was rebellion. If humanity was allowed to break free, other quarantine species would try the same thing. The council's authority would collapse. They had to respond with overwhelming force. They had to make humanity an example that would terrify the galaxy into obedience. Some council members argued for negotiation. The Morphean Collective, ancient and wise, suggested that perhaps humanity had earned the right to be heard. But they were outvoted. The council decided. They would send the 5th Enforcement Fleet, 200 warships commanded by Admiral Kelshar of the Drexian Empire. The Drexians were the council's hammer. They had crushed 100 rebellions. They would crush this one too. Admiral Kelshar received his orders and smiled. Humans had gotten lucky with the beacon. That was all. Ancient automated systems could be tricked. But his fleet was different. His ships were crewed by warriors who had fought for centuries. His tactics had won battles against opponents far more advanced than these primitive humans. This would be easy. This would be quick. This would be a message to the galaxy. Do not challenge the council. The 5th Fleet arrived at the edge of Earth's solar system 3 days later. They came in perfect formation, their ships gleaming with power and authority. Admiral Kelshar expected to find frightened humans hiding behind their broken beacon. Instead, he found 350 human warships waiting in battle formation. Earth had not been idle. Every ship they had built over 3 years was there, ready, armed, refusing to run. Admiral Stephen Blake commanded the human fleet from the carrier Resolute. He stood in the command center, looking at the tactical displays showing the council fleet. 200 against 350. The numbers favored humanity. But Blake knew that numbers were not everything. The council ships were better armed, better shielded, crewed by species with centuries of space combat experience. This was going to be the hardest fight humanity had ever faced. Commander Ryan Carter coordinated the battle plan from his station. He had studied every engagement the council had ever fought. He knew their patterns. They would form a wall and advance slowly, using overwhelming firepower. They would expect the humans to either scatter and be picked off one by one, or charge forward and be cut down. Ryan's plan was different. It was chaos organized into weapon. It was everything the council did not expect. Admiral Kelshar opened communication channels and offered humanity one chance to surrender. Return to Earth, accept permanent monitoring. Never leave the solar system again. The alternative was total destruction. Every human ship would be destroyed. Earth itself would be quarantined with even stricter measures. This was their last warning. Jake Morrison answered for humanity. His voice was calm and clear. Humans did not surrender. Humans did not accept cages. If the council wanted a fight, they would get one. And when the battle was over, the council would learn something important about humanity, something they should have learned before trying to imprison them. Humans were not the strongest species, not the smartest, not the most advanced, but humans were the most stubborn. And sometimes, stubbornness was enough. The battle began with the council's standard assault. 200 ships fired as one. The space between the fleets filled with plasma and missiles. It was beautiful and deadly. The council's discipline was perfect. Every shot coordinated, every movement calculated. They advanced like a wall of fire, expecting the human fleet to break and scatter. Instead, the human fleet did something unexpected. They scattered, but not in fear. They broke into dozens of small groups, each moving in different directions. The council's coordinated fire suddenly had no single target. They were fighting 100 small battles instead of one large one. Admiral Kelshar tried to adjust, but his fleet's strength was in formation. Breaking formation meant giving up their advantage. The humans attacked from every direction at once. They did not fight fair. They used asteroids as cover. They hid behind debris. They fired and ran, then came back from different angles. When their shields failed, they rammed council ships. When they were surrounded, they self-destructed, taking enemy vessels with them. They fought like cornered animals, desperate, vicious, refusing to die quietly. Admiral Kelshar had never seen anything like it. The humans should have been easy targets, but they moved too fast, changed tactics too quickly. They adapted to every strategy he tried. When he sent ships to chase small human groups, the humans led them into traps. When he kept his fleet together, the humans picked off stragglers. Nothing worked the way it was supposed to. The battle raged for 14 hours. 14 hours of constant fighting. Ships exploded on both sides. Space filled with debris and bodies. The Council fleet had better technology, but humanity had something else. They had fury. They fought like every battle was their last. Because for them it was. If they lost here, humanity would be enslaved forever. So they did not lose. Jake Morrison's vanguard led a group of 20 ships against Admiral Kelshar's flagship. They should have been destroyed. But they came in fast and low, using the flagship's own size against it. The big ship could not turn fast enough to track them. They hit it with everything they had: missiles, plasma, nuclear weapons. The flagship's shields held, but barely. Admiral Kelshar watched his fleet falling apart. 67 ships destroyed, more damaged. His perfect formation was chaos now. The humans had lost 93 ships, but the ones remaining fought even harder. They smelled victory. They pushed forward without fear. Kelshar realized something that made his blood cold. The humans were willing to trade 2 ships for every one of his. Maybe 3. They would win through sheer determination and sacrifice. For the first time in his long military career, Admiral Kelshar gave an order he never thought he would give: retreat. The 5th Enforcement Fleet turned and ran. They left behind their dead and wounded. They abandoned their formation. They fled from a species they had called primitive just days before. The impossible had happened again. Humanity had won. As the Council ships disappeared into faster-than-light travel, the human fleet hung in space, battered and bleeding but victorious. 23,000 humans had died in the battle. 93 ships were destroyed or unsalvageable. But they had won. They had proven that humanity could not only break free, but defend its freedom. The cage was broken. The guards were running, and the galaxy was watching. The news spread through the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Humanity had defeated the 5th Enforcement Fleet. Species that had been quiet for centuries suddenly started whispering, started wondering, started asking questions they had not dared to ask before. If humans could break free, if humans could win against the Council, then maybe freedom was possible for others too. On 36 quarantined worlds, people looked up at their skies and saw their cages differently. For generations they had accepted that the Council's power could not be challenged. The beacons surrounding their worlds were supposed to be unbreakable. The enforcement fleets were supposed to be unstoppable. But humanity had broken one and defeated the other. The impossible was no longer impossible. The Galactic Council met in emergency session again, but this time the chamber was filled with anger and fear, not directed at humanity, directed at each other. The Morphean Collective demanded answers. How had the 5th Fleet failed? Why had the beacon been vulnerable? What would happen when other species tried to copy what humanity had done? Commander Vexthor argued for total war. Send every ship. Destroy Earth completely. Make the cost of rebellion so high that no one would ever try again. But 3 of the Council's 12-member species refused. The Morpheans said enough blood had been spilled. The Talraxians worried about the cost of another military campaign. The Zenthi questioned whether the Council even had the right to imprison species anymore. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Council was divided. The unity that had held them together was cracking. The Drexian Empire and its allies pushed for escalation. The moderate species pushed for negotiation. And in the middle, species that had stayed silent for millennia started finding their voices. The Council's control was slipping. On Earth, the victory celebration lasted 1 day. Then Director Lisa Chen called another emergency meeting. She stood before the human government leaders with hard truth. The Council would come back. They had to. If they did not, their entire structure would collapse. The next attack would be larger, deadlier. Humanity had won 1 battle, but the war was just beginning. Captain Jake Morrison proposed something bold. Stop waiting for the Council to come to them. Go on the offensive. Not by attacking the Council directly, but by offering other quarantined species the same gift humanity had claimed: freedom. Show the galaxy that humanity did not just fight for itself. It would fight for anyone who wanted to be free. Many argued against the plan. It was too risky, too aggressive. It would unite the entire council against Earth. But Admiral Stephen Blake supported Jake. He understood military strategy. The only way to protect Earth was to make sure the council had too many problems to focus on just one species. If a dozen worlds broke free at once, the council could not stop them all. Dr. Kate Sullivan had been studying the technology they captured from the council ships. Her team had made an important discovery. The council's technology was ancient, really ancient. Some of their systems had not been updated in thousands of years. They relied on old designs because they worked and because changing them would be difficult. The council's greatest strength, their age and experience, was also a weakness. They had stopped innovating. Humanity was different. Humans had only been in space for a few hundred years. Their technology was new and flexible. Engineer Maya Rodriguez showed that human ships were already matching council vessels in several areas. In 5 more years, human technology would be equal or better. The council had stopped evolving. Humanity was just getting started. The decision was made. Jake Morrison would take a fleet of 100 ships on a diplomatic mission, but diplomacy backed by force. They would visit 3 quarantined species: the Talarian Republic, imprisoned for 800 years, the Keshan Collective, locked away for 6 centuries, and the Vorath Alliance, quarantined for 400 years. Jake would offer them what the council never had: a choice, a chance, an alliance. The Vanguard led the fleet into Talarian space. The Talarians were a peaceful species who had been quarantined because the council decided they were not ready for advanced technology. 800 years they had waited. 800 years of watching their beacon and knowing they would never be free. When Jake Morrison arrived and offered to help them break it, the Talarian leaders thought it was a trap. Jake explained what humanity had done. He showed them the recordings of the beacon's destruction. He offered them the technology, the knowledge, the help. He asked for nothing in return except friendship. The Talarians could not believe it. No one had ever offered to help them before. Commander Ryan Carter worked with Talarian engineers, teaching them what Ben Foster had discovered. Within 3 days, the Talarian beacon fell. The Talarians watched their cage burn and wept. 800 years of imprisonment ending in minutes. Their leaders swore an oath to humanity. They would never forget this gift. They would stand with Earth against the council, against anyone who tried to put them in chains again. The first alliance was formed. The Keshan were next. They were warriors, quarantined because the council feared their military culture. 600 years of forced peace had not made them soft. When Jake offered to break their beacon, the Keshan leaders asked one question: would humanity stand with them when the council came for revenge? Jake promised they would. The Keshan beacon fell, and another species joined humanity's growing alliance. The Vorath were scientists and explorers. The council had imprisoned them for developing technology too quickly. 400 years they had waited, studying, learning, preparing. When their beacon fell, the Vorath did not celebrate. They got to work. Their scientists joined with Dr. Kate Sullivan's team, sharing knowledge that the council had tried to suppress. Together, human and Vorath minds created new weapons, new shields, new ships. The Galactic Council watched in horror. 3 more quarantined worlds were free, but worse than that, they were organizing. They were building a coalition. Humanity was not just defending itself anymore. It was actively dismantling the Council's system of control. The moderate species on the Council renewed their calls for negotiation. The militaristic species demanded immediate action. Commander Vexthor stood before the Council and spoke with fury. This could not be allowed to continue. Every day humanity remained free, more species would rebel. The Council had to act now with overwhelming force. They had to show the galaxy that rebellion had consequences. They had to crush humanity so completely that no one would ever dare to challenge the Council again. The vote was called. Should the Council assemble the Grand Armada, 5,000 warships that had not been brought together since the Council's founding war 10,000 years ago, the ultimate weapon, the final answer to any threat? 9 of the 12 species voted yes. Only the Morphians, Talraxians, and Zenthi voted no. It was decided. The Grand Armada would be assembled. Humanity and its new allies would be destroyed. The Council chose Supreme Fleet Marshal Dracon to lead the Armada. He was a legend among the Drexians. 300 years of military service. Hundreds of battles. Never defeated. He was old and hard and absolutely certain of victory. 5,000 ships against humanity's ragtag coalition. It would not even be close. It would be a massacre, a lesson, a warning to the galaxy written in fire and blood. Jake Morrison received the intelligence about the Armada from Morphean contacts who opposed the war. 5,000 ships. The number was overwhelming. The human fleet, even combined with the Talarians, Keshin, and Vorath, numbered only 2,000. The Council had more than double their strength. And the Council's ships were still more advanced, better armed, more experienced. Admiral Stephen Blake called a war council. The leaders of all 4 species met on the Resolute. They looked at the numbers and knew the odds were bad. Really bad. Any normal military analysis said they would lose. But Blake looked at his fellow commanders and smiled. Normal military analysis did not account for one thing: desperation. When people fought for their survival, for their freedom, for everything they had, normal rules did not apply. Commander Ryan Carter presented his battle plan. It was crazy. It involved sacrifices that made even hardened warriors uncomfortable, but it was the only chance they had. The Council expected them to defend, to form lines and try to hold. Ryan's plan was different. They would attack. They would be aggressive. They would make the Council pay for every inch of space, and if they were going to die, they would make sure the Council remembered the cost. Dr. Kate Sullivan worked around the clock with the Vorath scientists. They developed new weapons, tricks and traps that the Council had never seen. Not because they were more advanced, because they were creative. Desperate people fighting for survival came up with ideas that comfortable people never thought of. The Council was about to learn what desperation could create. The Grand Armada assembled at the edge of Council space. 5,000 ships arranged in perfect formation. Supreme Fleet Marshal Draken stood on his flagship and looked at the greatest military force ever assembled. He thought about humanity, about their luck and their stubbornness. It would not matter. This was not about technology anymore. This was about raw power, and he had all the power. The message went out to the coalition. The Grand Armada was coming. The Grand Armada appeared like a metal storm. 5,000 warships emerging from faster-than-light travel all at once. The space around them bent and twisted from the sheer amount of mass and energy. Supreme Fleet Marshal Draken stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Pride of Ages, and looked at the enemy force waiting for him. 2,000 ships. Human, Talarian, Keshin, and Vorath vessels scattered in loose formation. They looked small, weak, doomed. Admiral Stephen Blake watched the Armada appear on his displays. He was on the Unity, Earth's new command carrier, surrounded by the best tactical minds from 4 species. The numbers were crushing. 5,000 against 2,000. Every calculation said this was suicide. But Blake had stopped trusting calculations. He trusted the people around him. People who refused to give up. People who had already done the impossible twice. Captain Jake Morrison commanded the strike force aboard the Vanguard. 50 of the fastest, deadliest ships from all 4 species. Their job was simple and terrifying. When the moment came, they would punch through the Armada and go for the flagship. They would either cripple the Council's command structure or die trying. Probably both. Jake looked at his crew and saw no fear. Only determination. Only fury. Supreme Fleet Marshal Draken opened a communication channel to the Coalition fleet. His voice was cold and final. This was humanity's last chance. Surrender now. Accept permanent Council authority. Earth would become a monitored world. The Talarians, Keshin, and Vorath would return to their cages. It would be peaceful. It would be merciful. Or they could fight and every ship would be destroyed. Every world would be punished. The choice was theirs. Jake Morrison answered for the Coalition. His voice was steady and clear, broadcast across every channel in the galaxy. Humanity did not surrender. The Talarians would not return to their cage. The Keshin would not bow. The Vorath would not stop exploring. They had all learned the same lesson. Freedom was worth any price. Death was better than chains. And if the Council wanted to destroy them, they would have to pay in blood. Come and try. The Grand Armada advanced. 5,000 ships moving as one, their formation perfect, their discipline absolute. This was how the Council had won 1,000 battles. Overwhelming force applied with precision. They would roll over the Coalition like a wave crushing sand. Draken had seen it happen before. The enemy would break. They always broke. The coalition fleet did not break. As the armada approached, the 2,000 ships suddenly scattered. Not in panic. With purpose. They broke into hundreds of small groups, each moving independently. Commander Ryan Carter's battle plan was in motion. The Council wanted one big battle. Ryan was going to give them 1,000 small ones. The armada fired. The space between the fleets filled with plasma and missiles, enough firepower to destroy a solar system. But the coalition ships were not where the targeting systems expected. They moved too fast, changed direction too often, used the armada's own size against it. The big ships could not track targets that refused to stay still. Dr. Kate Sullivan's newest weapon activated. Microscopic drones invisible to sensors, launched from hidden ports on coalition ships. Millions of them. They drifted into the armada formation on solar wind and magnetic currents. The Council's shield stopped big threats. They were not designed for something so small. The drones found ventilation ports, exhaust vents, any tiny opening. Then they went to work. Council ships started having problems. Weapon systems failed for no reason. Shields flickered. Engines stuttered. The drones were infiltrating their systems, causing havoc from inside. It was not enough to destroy the ships, but it was enough to disrupt them, to make them vulnerable, to create openings that coalition forces exploited without mercy. Dracon realized what was happening and adapted. He ordered all ventilation systems sealed. The ships would run on internal air for a while. The drone attack stopped, but Ryan Carter had expected that. The coalition switched tactics instantly. They launched kinetic impactors, simple metal slugs accelerated to a fraction of light speed. No computers. No guidance systems. Just mass and velocity. The Council's fancy shields could stop energy weapons. Solid matter was harder. The battle raged for hours, then days. The Armada had never fought an enemy like this. The Coalition did not follow any rules of warfare. They used asteroids as weapons. They hid in debris fields. They fired and retreated, then attacked from different angles. When conventional tactics failed, they improvised. When their ships were damaged, they turned them into bombs. They fought with creativity born from desperation. 28 hours into the battle, Dracon made a decision. The coalition was too scattered. He needed to consolidate his forces. He ordered the Armada to tighten formation, to concentrate their firepower. It was textbook strategy, exactly what he had been taught. Exactly what had won him 100 battles. Exactly what Admiral Blake had been waiting for. Blake saw the Armada formation tighten and gave the order. Operation Spear. 300 coalition ships turned and charged straight at the center of the Armada formation. It looked like suicide. It was supposed to look like suicide. The Council focused all their fire on the charging ships. Thousands of weapons targeting 300 vessels. The space between them became a solid wall of plasma fire. The 300 ships took horrible damage. Half of them were destroyed in the first minute. But the rest kept coming. Their shields were enhanced with Vorath technology, reinforced with Keshan armor, powered by engines that the Talarians had perfected over 800 years of study. They punched through the wall of fire. They reached the Armada formation, and they created a hole. Jake Morrison and his strike force poured through that hole like a spear through flesh. 50 ships diving deep into the Armada's heart, heading straight for the Pride of Ages. The Council ships tried to close the gap, but it was too late. The Coalition had sacrificed 300 vessels to give Jake this chance. He was not going to waste it. The Pride of Ages was the most powerful warship ever built. Its shields could withstand a star-going supernova. Its weapons could crack a planet. Jake's strike force could not destroy it. But that was not the plan. Engineer Ben Foster had discovered something during his study of Council technology. Their quantum communication network was their greatest strength. Every ship connected. Every order instant. But it was also a weakness. Break the network and you break the fleet. The strike force did not attack the Pride of Ages directly. They attacked its communication arrays, missiles, plasma, even physical rams, anything to damage the quantum transmitters that connected Dracon to his fleet. The flagship's defenses focused on protecting the ship itself. The communication systems were considered secondary. That mistake cost them everything. Ben Foster's virus, loaded into missiles and launched by the Vanguard, penetrated the Pride of Ages' communication network. It spread through the quantum connections like poison through veins. Suddenly, 5,000 ships lost contact with their flagship, lost their coordinated commands, lost their perfect discipline. Each ship's captain had to make individual decisions, and individual decisions meant chaos. The Armada formation fell apart. Some ships tried to protect the flagship. Some retreated to regroup. Some kept fighting on their own. The perfect unity that made the Armada so powerful was gone. Now it was 5,000 ships fighting 5,000 separate battles. And that was something the coalition could handle. They swarmed the confused council forces like wolves on scattered prey. Dracon watched his command network die, watched his perfect fleet dissolve into disorder. He tried to restore communications, but the human virus was too deep in the system. For the first time in 3 centuries of warfare, he felt genuine fear. Not fear of death. Fear of failure. Fear of losing. Fear of these impossible humans who refused to accept when they were beaten. The Pride of Ages took critical damage. Multiple hull breaches. Shields failing. Engineering sections on fire. Draken had no choice. He broadcast an emergency retreat order on all available frequencies. The Grand Armada, undefeated for 10,000 years, turned and fled. They left behind 2,000 destroyed ships and tens of thousands of dead. They ran from a force half their size. They ran from humanity and its allies. The coalition fleet hung in space, battered and bleeding but alive. They had lost 800 ships. Hundreds of thousands of people were dead. But they had won. The Council's ultimate weapon had been defeated. The galaxy's greatest military force had been broken. The impossible had happened one more time. 1 week later, the Galactic Council requested a formal meeting. Not to issue demands, to negotiate. Jake Morrison, now promoted to admiral and chosen as humanity's chief diplomat, traveled to the council chambers. He walked into the room where 12 species had ruled the galaxy for millennia. He sat down at their table, not as a prisoner, not as a subordinate. As an equal, the Morphean Collective spoke first. They acknowledged what humanity and its allies had proven: strength, courage, the right to be free. But they asked one question. What did the coalition want? Jake's answer was simple: freedom for all species. No more quarantines. No more imprisoning entire civilizations. The galaxy should be open to everyone who wanted to explore it. Peace through choice, not through force. Commander Vexthor, humbled by 3 defeats, made a proposal that shocked everyone. Jisu,